We ended last week's video with a table full of rose petals from the flowers arrangements that I had made with the flower frogs, and I have been collecting these rose petals all season long, all summer long, in order to dry them for use in creating some beautiful perfumed potpourris. So what is actually the meaning of potpourri? In the translation isn't really very pleasant, because the French translation of potpourri means rotten pot. And that's because the first potpourris that were made actually were made in the wet style. They were moist potpourris. They were put into a pot or a jar. The jar was closed up, and the ingredients actually did rot. They rotted in a good way, leaving a really wonderful scent. For example, perfume jars from opened Egyptian tombs still emit a fragrance, a lovely, perfumey fragrance. Egyptians had access to huge quantities of rose petals, and these would be stuffed in large jars and urns, closed up with a fixative, and then put in the tombs of the Egyptian kings and pharaohs. So clearly, perfumery has been with us for a very long time. It's very much an ancient art. There really is an art to creating scent by the combination of certain ingredients, as witnessed by the perfume industry. But as early as the 16th century, women in particular were scenting their homes using herbs, spices, flower petals, roots, woodsy items, even fruits, fruit rinds and citrus fruits, in particular orange flowers, to scent their homes and their rooms. Many of the first gardens were probably in the monasteries, where the herbalists in the monasteries would create medicines and ointments for the villagers. If you ever watch the series Catafel, I love that series. He was a 12th century monk, and it's actually a mystery series, but I love his herbarium, where he creates all sorts of things from the herbs that he grows in his gardens there in the monastery. It's a great series, I love it. But back to the housewife of the 16th century. Fortunately for the mistress of the house, the herbal gardens, the potagers, the rose gardens did not remain the domain of the monasteries of the 11th century or the palaces of the Egyptian kings. They came right into her own backyard, and she was able to create all sorts of wonderful things for her family. In many of the large old homes of the 16th century, there was something called a still room. And this was a small room in the house in which there was always a fire ablaze. So the room was always nice and warm, and it was a perfect place for the mistress of the house to bring in her garden goods, her herbs, her flowers, her roses. It was in this room where the tinctures and the ointments and the remedies and the medicines and the cordials and the sachets and anything that would provide health and well-being of her family would be created in this little room. Also stored in this room would be any of the imported oils or aromatics that she would need. Housewives also sprinkled the floor with herbs and rose petals and spices, just to give the home a more refreshing scent and get rid of the musty odors in the house. And around the mid-century, as I mentioned before, around the mid-century, 18th century, is when the term potpourri came into being. And a whole new window opened into mixing up ingredients and combining different things to make lovely scents. And these were simply a matter of experimentation, and each person had their own individual recipes or something handed down from someone, or they just experimented and created their own recipes. So let's give a few of these recipes a try and see what we can come up with today. For making our potpourri, we will be using the dry method, not the rotted pot method, because we won't be using moist ingredients. We will be using dried ingredients. Now, to make the moist potpourri, it takes a lot longer to get it ready to actually be able to use. But apparently, from what I understand, the scent does last longer. But this way, it's a little more popular to do it this way with the dry ingredients. And so that is what we will be doing. So in order to put together our dry mixture of potpourri, we're going to have a combination of 5 groups of ingredients. The first in this group will be our dried flowers. And of the dried flowers, and there are many scented perfumed flowers that you will want to use, but the most important and the one most called for in recipes are roses. The easiest way for drying almost all of these flowers will be to hang them, gather them in bunches and hang them upside down. And I've done many videos about this. But you want to strip off the bottom leaves. I actually like to use the leaves as well. Take off the thorns on the roses. And then hang them in groups of maybe 5 or 6 sprigs. And you can let them dry that way. Now, you really want to pick your flowers, your petals, and your plants when they're at their peak. Your flowers when they're at their peak. That's when they're just about ready to open. And they're still young on the bush. And that's really hard for a gardener, because what we want is to have them in our garden. Now, at this time of the year, it's not that difficult for me because my rose bushes have really thinned out and they're not really putting on much of a show anyway. So if there are a few roses in the garden and there's only like 2 or 3 roses on a bush, I don't mind taking those when they're at their peak. But that's really hard for me to do during the summer. You leave them on the bush or in a vase, the less essential oil remains in those petals. But I will confess, I do leave them in the vase, and I do leave them on the bush, generally until they are ready to drop the petals anyway, and then I go through the garden and I just drop those petals in a basket. Because I'm not really going to be relying on the scent of these petals for my potpourri. I'm going to be relying on all the other things that I put in the mixture, and especially the essential oils that come in the bottles. For me, it's about the pattern, the color, and the nature of the rose petals. Start to dry out the flower petals, they are going to fade and fade and fade again, and they will never remain the same color. They will be a shadow of their former selves. But nevertheless, the beauty of a dried flower, I think, is absolutely subtle and distinctive and still very beautiful. So here is one that's been drying for weeks, but you can see that it's still got that beautiful look of antiquity and softness, and it's very muted, but it's still very beautiful. As long as we're talking about these roses that I sacrificed out of the garden, I want to tell you that this rose, out of all the roses that I have, has the most magnificent, intense scent. This is Eustacia Vi from David Austin, and I can't even begin to tell you the wonderful, strong perfume exuding from this gorgeous rose. Eustacia Vi. I'm expecting these petals to hold a lot of their scent in the potpourri. Here are some roses that I had in a bouquet last week when I did the flower frog video. And you can see they are pretty much dried completely, but they've still kept some beautiful color. and therefore these would be wonderful in the potpourri. They've kept a lot of color, and yet these little roses here have faded to a very, very, very pale, fleshy pink. Just gathering flower heads or flower petals, just put them in a wooden bowl or on a screen or on a flat surface and let them dry for about 10 days. When they're completely dry, put them in an airtight container and leave them in there until you're ready to use them. By the way, is this not a stunning, beautiful rose? This is called the Poet's Wife. This is a David Austin rose, and it smells like, oh my goodness. I just hope I can maintain this sweet, light, fruity fragrance. At least a little bit for the potpourri. Now when you're gathering your materials, it's best to gather them right around noon when the sun is out and there's no moisture or dew on the materials, the rose petals, or the herbs. Now these are honeysuckle flowers that are just starting to bloom again for us here in early October. So I'm gathering these right now. I'm going to let them dry on the table, and this will take about 6 to 10 days. Ingredient adds interest to your perfume, and that would be your herbs. So your herbs are varied and many that you can use. Rosemary, lemon verbena, any kind of a mint, bergamots, thymes, oreganos, and yarrow. Those are just a few that are available. And the most important of these is generally lavender. It's going to be called for in a lot of recipes. And when you know it, that's the one thing I have the most trouble growing. Your ingredients are completely dry. You want to put them in an airtight container until it's time to use them. So here we have a lot of rose petals, and they still have a wonderful scent, and you can see that they've kept their color. They're now more of subdued, they're not bright anymore, but they're still a beautiful, lovely, deep reds and copper colors, and a little bit of beige. Calendula has kept its color really well. And this chamomile is really, really wonderful. Oh, I wish you could smell that. Our dry mixture will be a combination of 5 groups of ingredients. Group number 1, and the most important, will be the scented flowers. And then herbs. Next, spices. And then essential oils. And in order to keep everything together and hold the scent for a very long time, you will need fixatives. The most important are your flowers. So those would be your rose petals, your wood, your bark, your fruit. These set the theme, actually. They give you the main scent of your potpourri. So here on the table we have some rose petals. These are just scented flowers. Some of the best scented flowers would be roses, honeysuckle, lilac, lily of the valley, wallflowers, and mignonette. Unfortunately, I've not been able to grow any mignonette. And here we have some jasmine, which is also highly scented. Be your herbs, your scented herbs like lavender, mints, balms, bergamot, and thyme. Here we have some rosemary, some lavender, and some thyme on the table. Successful perfume seldom has just one scent. It's rather a combination of complementary scents. So that's the spices, the herbs, and the flowers. Next, you want to add spices for richness and depth to your potpourri. Some of the more common and easily found would be cinnamon and cinnamon sticks, cloves, caraway seed, anise, star anise, You could also use allspice. You could use things like little pine cones, pine needles, pussy willow buds, pine buds, and wheat ears. There's just no limit to the sort of things that you can actually put into your potpourri. On our list of ingredients, and very important, are your fixatives, because it's the fixatives that hold the overall scent over a long period of time. Without these fixatives, the scent of your perfume will quickly be lost. So there are some things that may sound a little bit odd, but here they are. Orris root is probably one of the easiest to find, and you can get it in a powder or a chunky style like this. That's orris root. Next, coriander seed. Very easy to find. It's obviously one of the spices that you might be able to find right in your kitchen. Next, we have star anise. Once again, this is also a good fixative, as well as a decorative and spice item for your potpourri. And here we have cumin, which we have also used as a spice, but it's also a great fixative. Yeah. Next, we have frankincense. And another fixative would be gum benzoin. This one took a little searching for. Here it is. It's a resin, and it has a wonderful scent to it. It's actually just a fixative for your potpourri, but it also says on here that it has a great calming and uplifting effect on the mind. We'll find out if we use it. Might be wondering, where on earth am I going to find all these things? Well, they're actually fairly easy to find. Of course, the spices and the herbs you can find in your grocery store, or it's better to go online and look for them in bulk if you're going to be making a good deal of potpourri. The other items like the gum benzoin and the frankincense, those you might have to search a little bit for online, but there are also botanical shops, which I will give you a link to at the bottom of this video. So you can find all these items, including your dried flower petals and all the other things that you might need if you don't want to collect these on your own, or you don't have a garden and you just want to make potpourri. So all of these items are easily accessible. So also you want to know where you get your airtight containers. Well, basically, I think everybody has seen these, or just use jars. I collect glass jars all the time, pickle jars, olive jars, whatever we have. Those are just great for keeping things airtight. Keep your eyes open in the thrift stores. I got a set of these. These are really great. 3 of them. This is the medium-sized one. I got 3 of them at the Goodwill, and I spent less than $6 on 3 of them, and they have a great rubber seal. So just keep your eyes open, because you'll find lots of containers in order to store all your goods. On our list of 5 ingredients, we have our essential oils, and these can define your potpourri completely, or they can simply be a complementary scent for the potpourri in the end. Now you can get these just about anywhere these days, and they come in so many different scents. Actually, I wouldn't make potpourri without them. And the 16th century homemaker actually did have access to aromatic oils. They were imported, though. She didn't get them as easily as we do. So we have such things as cinnamon, lemongrass, sandalwood, peppermints, very popular. I think what I use more than anything is rose oil and lavender. But there are so many different scents. I also like lemongrass and rosemary. Oh, and bergamot too. Yeah, I like all of them. So these are the essential oils, and these you're only going to use tiny droplets of these essential oils to make your potpourri. So let's get started. We're going to start out with a really simple recipe called Rose and Mint Potpourri. Doesn't have very many ingredients, and you can even exchange some of these ingredients if you don't have everything. So I'll show you what this involves. Okay, our first ingredient are the flowers. So we're using rose petals. These have been dried for quite some time and stored away. And these rose petals are recently dried, just about a week ago. They're plenty dry. So we've got about 4 cups of rose petals. Our next ingredient are our fixatives. This is 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 2 tablespoons of orris root powdered, and 1 teaspoon of nutmeg or mace. You could also use mace. We have about a tablespoon of mint from the garden, 2 tablespoons of lavender buds, and 2 tablespoons of sweet woodruff. Now you can replace this with more mint. I just didn't have much mint that was dried to use. So, and now our essential oils are going to be lemon oil, peppermint oil, and rose oil. I'm going to be wearing rubber gloves because I'll be mixing this with my fingers pretty soon. But I'm going to start out by mixing it together with pestle. You could also do that just as easily with your fingers. Make sure it's well mixed. And the next thing we want to do is add our essential oils to this fixative. Using 4 drops of rose oil. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. 5 drops of peppermint oil. I think I got a little more than 3. And I'm just going to use 1 drop of lemon. Well, let's take it to the more essential oil you use, of course, the stronger your mix is going to be scent-wise. Then I'm going to mix that up with my fingers. Just mix it up with my fingers so that the fixative is completely covered. Now we're going to mix all our dry ingredients together. All the rose petals, sweet woodruff, the lavender, okay, now I'm going to add a couple little extras here just to make this a more beautiful looking potpourri. So I have some beauty berries here that I dried. I'm going to add those in there for some extra pattern and color. And just a few. Oops, too many. I want too many. And I'm also going to add some of these beautiful little rose hips that I got off my wild roses. And I want the stems as well. I want the little sticks and the stems. It just adds to the interest and the look of the potpourri, because potpourri isn't just about the scent, it's also about the beauty of the bowl or basket of potpourri. Mix it all together. Just even without the essential oils, this smells really wonderful. But now we do want to add our fixatives. And thoroughly mix this together so that everything is saturated. Now, just thoroughly mixing this up so that everything is evenly distributed throughout the entire mixture. You could double this recipe, triple it. I just like to make it in small batches like this. Now what I'm going to do with this is put it in a airtight container for 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, it's going to really develop into a really rich potpourri. And then, I guess right around when winter season is really here, I'll pull it out, put it in a beautiful bowl, and set it right in the middle of the room. 6 weeks or longer is really what you want to do to let your potpourri really age in that airtight container. And then you can take it out and you can release it, put it into a decorative bowl, and it will just scent your entire room and you will love it. So let's try another recipe. That one was pretty easy, and as you can see, the process is just absolutely a breeze. Make sure you mark it and put the date on it so that you can enjoy that in just a few months. For our next recipe, we're going to make a Victorian lavender potpourri. Now, my lavender buds, I never get this much lavender in my garden. I purchased this, and I will give you the link below to where you can get some of these things in bulk. So this is a lavender blossom, 1 cup of dried chamomile flowers, more color. To get more color in this, I'm going to add some of these little rose hips that I gathered a couple weeks ago from the wild rose bushes, and stems and all. I just like to take these and put them in a vase. I just think the rose hips are the sweetest things. I just never get enough of them. Some of the roses I plant strictly because they're supposed to have gigantic rose hips, but I haven't gotten very many off of them this year. These came off the wild roses. The way chamomile is also a fixative. My next ingredient is dried rosemary. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons. Spice is going to be 1 tablespoon of allspice. So here as my fixative, I've used 1 tablespoon allspice, 3 tablespoons of chopped orris root, and I've mixed in a little more chamomile flowers in there. And now for my essential oil, I'm going to use 6 drops of lavender oil. And I'm going to use about 2 drops of vanilla. Oops. More like 3. Again, we're going to mix that all together pretty thoroughly between our fingers and add that to the dry ingredients if we like the scent of it. If we don't like the scent of it, it's not strong enough, or I want to add another oil, I will do that at this time. But so far, let me see. That's nice. Lavender and vanilla are really nice together. So I'm going to add some bergamot leaves for color because he has really retained this olive green, pretty muted tone here. I could also use lavender leaves, except that I didn't collect any, so I'm going to just replace it with this. I think that's pretty. Wow. So let's mix the dry ingredients together and see if we need any more color in here. Actually, that's quite pretty. In a very mellow sort of a way. I like it. Add another texture with the rosemary. Or potpourri has got to age for 6 or more weeks. It gives you a chance to dry some extra flowers to use as decorative elements on top of your potpourri when you're able to put it into a lovely basket or bowl or container. So I have got these dahlias from the garden. They dry really, really nicely, and they have a lot of color. So I'm just drying some of these flat, and you can continue to do that for the next 6 weeks. As long as you have flowers in the garden, keep on drying them, and you want to use them to make a really pretty presentation. Once you do, bring out your potpourri into your room. So another thing that would look great in this one, I think, is yarrow, and I've got a lot of that. Okay, the fixative and the oil goes in with the dry ingredients. Now mix it all together, distribute it evenly, and store it away in a container. This potpourri is ready to go into a sealed container, but I just want to take a nice look at it for now. When it is eventually ready to be used in the house, you can put it in baskets or nice attractive vessels, teacups, anything. And when you're not in the room with it, you want to cover it up and just keep that fragrance going for as long as possible. These can last for years. I do think there's a subtle beauty to the look of potpourri, even though the flower petals and the herbs have all faded. It really is lovely because you do have these particular little colors in here. Sage blues and greens, yellow ochres, olive greens, pale pinks, peaches, creams, and the patterns from the various plants and foliage. It really enhances these soft muted colors. So as your potpourri ages in its container, be sure to continue to forage in your garden and in the woods for whatever you can find that might be interesting to use on top of your potpourri when you're able to use it in your house. You put it in a pretty Victorian dish or a beautiful basket and top it off with a couple beautiful dried roses, or in this case we have some dahlias and marigolds. They're going to dry really nicely. They'll look great as a topping or a decor on top of that potpourri. So just keep on collecting the flowers and drying them. Really good getting back into the herbarium again to do this project. And some of the books that I've used in the making of the potpourri and for information are right here on the table. These are all older books, but they're probably pretty easy to find still, and they're all equally good. If you would like to make some more mixtures, perhaps in another video, let me know. We'll make some more spicy mixtures next time. In next week's video, I am going to be doing an autumn project, and that is building a beehive from a kit. So we'll see you there. From Hopalong Hollow, this is Jerry. Bye-bye.